Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Impact Factor. I am your host, Katie Van Aken, and I'm excited about this week's episode because I got to reconnect with an old collaborator of mine who his lab was in Germany, my lab was in the US, and yet we kept running into each other at conferences all over the world, and we became pretty good friends. I hope you enjoy our conversation and learn a little bit about his experiences, and without further ado, here's my conversation with Nicolas Jäckel, PhD. Okay, so Nico, it's been so long. This is great. So let's see. So you and I last saw each other in 2017 when our groups were collaborating. You from Germany, me from Drexel, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like we interacted a lot at different conferences, which maybe we'll get to. But let me ask you a little about you. So what was your PhD journey like? Um, what you went right from. How does it work in Germany? Let's start there.
So maybe let's start with my bachelor's first. So
Yeah.
so in Germany we call it the A grade, so Abitur, and after that you can decide if you go for company apprenticeship or if you go for your university or whatever kind of typical high school that we have. So the variety is quite huge, and I choose the university. Started with a bachelor, and this bachelor. The first thing is like the decision, what kind of bachelor do you want to do? So there is the opportunity to have the standards like a physics or mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, whatsoever. And I found this new type of studies, which was called microtechnology and nanostructures. And that
Oh.
was a combination of a physics and an electrical engineer. So I was doing half and half and with the focus on microsystems and all the phenomena that happen uh, on the nano like everything sized in the nano range. And yeah, that was really fun. And at the end of my bachelor studies, there is this bachelor thesis, and there I had the opportunity to go to a company called Draeger, that's in the northern part of Germany, and there they had a special type of gas sensor. So it's a Dragger you might know from Dragonman, like the gas, the face mask of the fireman.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So that's the company, and they also produce sensors for sensing hazardous gases like carbon monoxide or kind of whatever nitro oxides. So everything that's dangerous for the body, and they have a wide range of sensors. And what the problem of those sensors usually is they are sensitive for one type of gas, but they also have cross sensitivities for other gases. So what you need is basically a very good filter that has the ability to let the gas flow through, but in the same time must take away the part of the incoming air that is non-wished and that might cause some cross sensitivity. And that was basically my bachelor thesis, like the test of a new type of filter. Um, and that was fun. So I had like the experience of the university, and then it was my first time working in a company in a development center, and I was quite happy. But at that time, I was thinking, okay, just a bachelor, maybe that's not enough. So I was coming back to Saarbrücken again for the masters, and I did exactly the same. So also microtechnology and nanostructures in the masters. And yeah, at the end of those masters, there was the question, okay, in which field do I want to go? So I had one a group that was working in the gas sensing, so I could continue what I did for my bachelor's. And there was this new professor, Professor Presser. He was coming back from America. He was a brand new group, and the group was called Energy Materials. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. So let's try it out. At that time, one of my colleagues from studies was already working there. He was doing already his master thesis. And yeah, so I joined this at that time very small group. We were like the two master students, three postdocs, and two technicians, and the professor. So it was really It was really small, and the lab simply did not exist. So all the machines were just there to be built up, and all the supply that you need for the machines. So it was a lot of hands-on in the beginning. It was really, really nice. And yeah, during that time, the professor approached me and asked me if I'm interested in continuing as a PhD.
Mm.
So that's how it came. And well, first I was a little bit like, do I really want to continue at university? I was like, my experience in the industry was nice in this development department of Dräger, but some kind he convinced me. Um, and this convincing was also because my PhD was sponsored by the German-Israeli Foundation. And that means I had a direct connection to Doron Auerbach in Tel Aviv in Israel. And he's like one of the very big names in the battery world at the time. And I was feeling honored that I got this chance to really, yeah, work in such a high class and big names, and like everybody was reading his studies and his papers. So yeah, that was really good. And in the beginning, I started with only focus on supercapacitors. So to be technically correct, electrical double layer capacitors.
Oh man, I haven't thought
And
about that in a while.
yeah, well, supercap is just the brand name from a company, and the technical term is actually much more complicated. This is why everybody says supercaps.
Yeah.
But yeah, as it is my PhD, I'm always trying to be like this nitpicking, just
Hmm.
because it's fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was like in the beginning all about the supercaps and the yeah, physical adsorption on ions on the surface of an electrode to have some high power but low energy density devices. And at some point, I was like, yeah, that's nice, but what about the lithium-ion batteries that everybody's talking about? So at some point during my PhD, I was interested to go this next step and start working with lithium-ion battery materials like lithium manganese oxide or lithium iron phosphate, so olivine and spinel type materials. And that was also a nice step, because then it opened a complete new world. Because in the supercap world, it's like a lot of physical, yeah, the mechanisms, the phenomena
Yeah.
can be explained in a physical way. But for batteries, you actually need some kind of electrochemistry understanding. Uh,
Yeah.
like the potentials are interesting, like when the reaction happens, what type of activation energy you need to make the reaction happen. And so all this stuff was new to me, and it made like the whole field much more wider, especially when we come to our collaboration work, when it was about the MXenes, where you have like these two-dimensional materials, and which are neither a typical supercap nor are they a battery type material. So there's something in between. And that was very nice to see, like, okay, there comes something up that's mixing up the two worlds. And
And you were familiar with both at that point because you had been
at that
doing.
point, exactly, at that point, I was familiar with both. But I was still like, when I remember the first measurements that I did with the MXenes and the ionic liquids at that time, when we had this problem that we charged them and the volume did decrease. So
Yep.
like we thought we apply some ions in between these layers, but actually we saw it's shrinking. So
Yep.
we take out ions. In the beginning, I remember we had like long discussions with the professor, and he said like, this is impossible. Like please repeat these measurements. And then I came up with 3 times the same measurements. It was 3 times the same result. And I was like, okay, we have something new. So let's
It's
dig in.
this is really happening. Yeah.
This is really happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. So you said that your research group when you joined with Dr. Presser was pretty small. Did it grow while you were there?
Yes, it was growing a lot. So during the first year, we came to, oh, what was it, like 5 or 6 master students, and all of them did continue with a PhD. So after
Okay.
1 year, it was like the whole group was already with at least 6 PhDs, and there were more master students coming in. Some of the postdocs did leave, but the group itself was growing and growing. So
Nice.
I think in the peak point, we were something like 20 people, or even more than 20 people in the group. I
Wow.
mean, it's nothing compared to Yuri Gogotsi group in
Yeah.
Drexel University, but
But just
uh,
the growth, the growth rate, I mean,
yeah.
you started small and by the time you were, you were still there. And so how does it so in America, your PhD is typically after your bachelor's and it's somewhere between 5 to 7 years. Um what's the year breakdown for you over there?
So yeah, in Germany, it's 3 years for the bachelor's, then it's 2 years for the master's, and then it's something like 3 or more years for the PhD.
Okay. So it adds
So
up to
since
about
I,
the same.
it's about exactly in total, it's about the same. It's just mixed up differently with this 2 years master's and 3 years PhD.
Mhm.
And for me, the GIF Foundation, so these German Israeli foundations, the guys who made the money or gave the money, they um, they did only give the money for 3 years. So
For
like
the
if I would
PhD
have
part.
needed exactly for the
Yeah.
PhD title, so if I would have needed longer, I would have needed to find another source of money, which can be like if you try to avoid this, let's say it
Yeah.
like this. So I was very much focused on keeping this 3 years, and it worked out quite well. I think in total I needed 2 years and 10 months
Okay.
until I was finished, so I was absolutely on time.
Yeah. So before we get to what happened after your PhD, what cities were you in for the different degrees? The same city?
So my whole university career was focused and based in Saarland University, yes.
Okay. Okay.
But during especially during the PhD time, I was visiting Drexel in Philadelphia, of
Uh-huh.
course, for our project. I was visiting Tel Aviv, Doron Auerbach in Bar Ilan University. That was in total, I was there 3 times. And I was one time at Kathego Otsoemena's group in South Africa in the
Hmm.
CNRS. That was also part of my PhD program. So I was spending there 1 month for doing some special, yeah, some special measurements in South Africa as well.
Did you like that you were able to kind of travel a lot?
Yeah, I was extremely enjoying that time to really have like this condensed visiting conferences, visiting external labs and all this stuff was very challenging. And yeah, I was just like with during my PhD, I saw 5 different continents.
Yeah.
The only part that I missed was Australia. But
Wow.
everything, but every other continent I was visiting at least once, and that was really an absolute bonus during my PhD time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I feel too. I feel like I did more traveling then than I did in the rest of my life combined, but it was
Same
especially
here.
cool. Yeah, it was especially cool to run into people like you and Anne from what was she from? Do you remember Anne?
And is from
Estonia.
Estonia, Tallinn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there was a couple people from Poland, from like for Christoph and some
Poznan.
of those, yeah,
Exactly,
Poznan.
exactly.
And we, we would run into each other at these conferences in different parts of the world, and that was super cool to feel like you had these international, connections that kept showing up in your life.
Yeah,
It was a very cool time. Actually, one of my
that
favorite
that was
memories is when you, me, and Anne, at least, there were others, I'm sure, were invited to that like young investigator symposium at, I think it was in Poznan.
that was in Boston. Exactly. That was in
Yeah.
Poland.
And so we were all like one after another as part of like the symposium, our presentations, and um, it was just a very cool kind of culmination at the end of our journey. I felt like that was cool.
that was the wrapping up. Yeah, I think the first time we also met in Poland, when like we were introduced to each other, and there was like, okay, your boss and my boss, they were like also working already together.
Yeah.
So why
Yeah.
not starting this collaboration project?
Yeah.
So I think Poland was a central part, like the beginning and the end
Yeah.
of this project.
Yeah. Very, very full circle. So very cool. Um, okay, so you finished your PhD in 2 years and 10 months. Right on track,
Yes.
right on
Yes.
target. Um, what next? Did you consider both industry and, a postdoc, or what was your thought process at that point?
Yeah, so at that point, I was already kind of thinking that I do not want to stay in the academia world. So at that point, I was very much focusing on industry. And the problem was at that time what to do with my kind of specific PhD in supercaps and batteries. And it was quite clear that in Saarland, so in the area in Germany where I was studying all the time and where I was born, um, there are no specific companies that I can work with. So I started to do applications across the whole Germany area, so German-speaking area, to find a proper job. And something interesting happened at that time because at the end of my PhD, when I was wrapping up all those different projects, I was writing a thesis that was called a cumulative thesis. So I had six separated papers, which were all already published in the journals. And what I did was some kind of combining them to a bigger story, like a deeper view. And at that time, I realized that this systematic thinking or thinking in systems was something that really was fun, and I was enjoying it to like putting these small pieces together, and in the end having a picture that is far bigger and more clear than what you had in each of the stories. And so I came to this what is called systems engineering approach. And my idea was, okay, well, I did now a PhD about batteries and supercaps. I was like top notch. I know like all the basics. I know very specific stuff. So why not to challenge myself when I go from academia to industry and do something new,
Hmm.
start something different again. So my approach was at that time to search for a company that is doing systems engineering
Hmm.
and yeah, start the new journey in the industry as a systems engineer. Of course, all the time with focus on battery systems if possible. But if not, there was still this systems approach and the thinking in the what you call V model and in the models that you can start to work with several viewpoints that you can use to approach a problem that describes a system. And so that was all super super fun, and I was enjoying it so much that after I have been on conferences and I have teaching my knowledge to others, and also at university, like being a teacher, giving lectures, and so on. So after all this, like I am giving knowledge from me to the other students. It wasn't like, okay, now I'm in the room and the others are the expert. So I am again in the classroom.
Yeah.
And this change of this viewpoint was it was a nice time. I was enjoying it a lot. And in the old company, so the first company that I went after my PhD, that was some kind of engineering service. So we were working with the passenger car OEMs to actually help them to better understand these very complicated systems that you have in the car right now, with this like assisted driving functions, safety functions, everything like hardware and software must play together to keep the car safe when it's like running automated, and all these things makes the development of a vehicle very very complicated. And for this systems engineering was helping. And yeah, but the problem there was it was project work. So it was like, okay, now you have half a year. give some insights, and then after this project was over, there was a new project coming up, and basically you start from zero again. So it
Yeah.
was very nice to learn a lot and to learn fast and to get like the pinpoints together. But at some point I was like, okay, now it's 3 years, it's repeating every time. I'm not in that mood anymore to keep in this project work. And so I applied for the company that I'm working right now, and that's Knorr-Bremse. So it's the world market leader for braking systems in commercial vehicles and in rail systems. And they were searching for a battery expert
Huh.
because they realized, okay, now after the passenger cars are being electrified, of course the trucks will also be electrified, and the buses, and like all the commercial vehicles, all the heavy duty vehicles. And they were searching for a battery expert, and there it was basically like combining again my systems approach to like work and understand a problem in a system and try to connect it in to make the best efficient, or like the best solution possible. And they were searching for a battery expert because they have certain products where they now need a battery. So that's my new challenge now, where I'm for like 1.5 years. I'm already in this company.
Wow.
And yeah, so now I've brought together all these parts, like the knowledge from the PhD and the knowledge from the systems engineering, my first job. And yeah, I enjoy it very much.
That's cool because I talk to a lot of people who have gone to industry but don't necessarily feel like they're using everything they learned in their PhD. Um, because it's hard. It's hard to find a job that aligns very specifically with what you studied for, you know, for years. Um, and I think it's a great story that you sort of left that world for a little bit, learned other things, and came back to it and are now applying, some of that stuff that obviously didn't leave your brain because it's hard to forget about batteries.
Yes, yes.
Um, so this might be a hard question, but what was it like to um convince your first employer that you were qualified to do systems engineering coming from sort of a different engineering background?
Well, I explained it them in the way I collected this data points, as I said, from my PhD. So I showed them certain graphs that I did in my PhD thesis to wrap up this single paperwork. And they also had some kind of assessment center. So they gave me a problem, and they asked me to provide a solution. And well, it seems like I convinced them.
Yeah. So they weren't concerned with like your degree and more like the skills you learned while you were doing your PhD and other things that you were good at.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's great. That's it's that's a good way to kind of switch directions a little bit is when you find an employer or a mentor who's willing to kind of let you pursue the things that you've learned, not necessarily the field that you've studied, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and you need much more than just the studies. So the studies are like I would say 50% of what you
Yeah.
need in the industry. Uh, Especially like the bigger the company, the more you need to some kind of, I mean it in a positive way, lobbying. So you need to bring people together that, and this convincing people to say like my idea is good because, and then you need to have your arguments, and um, then you come into a discussions because other people may have different opinions. And this is also a big part of working in industry. Like you have to have arguments, and you have to simply have the the possibility, or the ability to convince people.
Yeah.
This is the other 50%, I would say.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. So, looking back on your time as a PhD student, is there anything that you miss about that time in your life?
Well, at that time, the working was like 90% of my day I was
Yeah.
some kind of work related. That came because I shared a flat with two other people from the same group. So even if we were not at the university, we were sitting in the kitchen table, and maybe after some beers, then we started again discussing about work-related and study-related stuff. Um, so that was at some point, maybe that was a little bit too much. So I was like all the time, and my whole brain and everything was related to this to the work. And um, maybe at that time it would have been better to do some more breaks,
Yeah.
and maybe like seeing more my family, because my family was at that time already living in, like, it was not far, it was like 2 or 3 hours from Saarbrücken, but still it was enough so that I did not visit them as much as it was before when we were all living in one house. And yeah, maybe that's the biggest thing. So in the beginning, this whole PhD thing, and especially when you have a professor that is challenging you quite hard, um, it covers 90% of your life, and don't forget the other 10%. So
Mm.
do the breaks, and do not freak out when something does not work at the first approach. Um, and sometimes the hardest part during my PhD was actually when you learned after a few months of doing measurements that you run into the wrong direction. I mean, that happens. I think everybody has this point when you're trying to solve a problem, and you do some measurements, and you do some like electrode preparation, and then you do the all the characterizations and stuff. And at some point you realize, oh no, this is not gonna work, and this is
Yeah.
not. I'm not improving my system. I'm more like standstill or going backwards.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's also a result, but that's usually not what makes people happy, when you
Yeah.
say like, yeah, now I know 10 ways how does it not work.
Yeah. And those 10 ways took a long time to do, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think I probably when I look back, maybe blocked out those experiences because they were less pleasant ones.
Hmm.
Like obviously the times when things worked are the things you remember because you were celebrating them. Um, but I've never heard of a PhD student that didn't have those experiences, and so learning how to bounce back and keep working on the next solution is such a good advice. Um,
Yes.
so now that you are a working industry professional, do you have more of like a balance, like you work for the work day and then you don't do work at home, that kind of balance?
Yes, it's much more balanced, exactly. So
Mhm.
it's really so in Germany the rules are quite strict about working hours and the maximum time of working hours. So sometimes they are even too strict, because if you are like, if you started in the morning and then it's like, okay, you did not really make progress the whole day, and then in the evening at home, like after having a little dinner or something, and then you sit there, and then your mind says like, there is something, and then it's usually quite hard to officially make this kind of working hours at home, because you did already your work, and there's the
Yeah.
maximum time of daily work. And so it's like sometimes it can be a bit tricky in this very strict German rules. But you can always find a way to say like, okay, I keep this idea now, I write down some notes, and tomorrow morning the first thing I'm gonna do is write it properly down on a sheet, and discuss it with the colleagues.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean it's a whole different challenge than in here where we can basically work all the time, which is like a
Yeah.
different challenge, but a challenge nonetheless. Um, so what do you use your non-working time for? Do you have any hobbies?
Yeah, so I have two dogs at the moment. They are
Nice.
like covering most of the time.
Hmm.
During the pandemics, we even had three dogs at home. So
Wow.
I was like the dog daddy, walking walking three dogs and playing with them can cover a lot of this boring times during the pandemic when everything was closed and no contact to the outside world was wanted, or like at some point it was strictly forbidden to meet people
Mm.
in this lockdown times. So it was very good to have those three dogs. But now when you like work full time again, then two dogs is enough. And something that changed also, like during my PhD or during my whole studies, I was doing a lot of music. So I was playing in an orchestra, and I was being on stage like a musical actor. So we did some
Oh.
some small musicals, and that was at that time that was also taking a lot of time, and it was super fun. But now, since I'm here in Munich, so when I moved and I started in industry, the music is now a little bit in the background. So I didn't start playing in an orchestra again, but never say never, I would say.
Yeah, I'm all for that. You'll have to keep me posted on your orchestra pursuits. What instrument did you play?
The flute.
Oh, very
So I'm
cool.
sitting first row.
Very portable too. I played the French horn, which is
Yeah.
much heavier than a flute, so
Well,
harder to transport.
when I was a child and there was like this decision, okay, I want to go for an orchestra. And there was this question like, what do you want to play?
Hmm.
And I think at that time I was already this kind of lazy person that I said, okay, don't give me a super heavy instrument.
I know.
I want something handy. And then people said like, yeah, but the flute, that's more like an instrument that very often it's what girls play. I was like, yeah, but I don't mind. It's
Yeah,
handy, it's small, and I don't mind. So
that's awesome. I love that. Um, yeah, I know. It's funny because they ask you, we had the same thing. Like they ask you what instrument you want to play, and you're like, maybe 8 years old. How am I supposed to know? So your reason for picking the flute was actually like pretty logical.
yes.
Like like I don't want to carry something too heavy. So, um, very cool. And then for the musical acting, did you sing too
Yes,
and
exactly.
and
So I
dance?
was I was exactly. I was singing at the choir, and this choir. So I started there, I think, in the age of 10, so as a kid. And this choir also moved from this just singing as a choir into this musical area.
Cool.
And so I came into this. So it was also an experience to not just sing as a choir and to have like this whole acting and yeah, some kind of dancing choreographies and so on. It
Man,
was a
all
nice
these
time.
all these years I didn't know this about you. This is so fun to learn. Um, okay, so I'm gonna move on to my three sort of last questions. Um,
Hmm. Okay.
so first, when you I guess when you were offered the opportunity to start your PhD, um, and you were coming from your master's, was there anything that you found challenging, or even going from bachelor's to master's, something that was challenging to adjust to, or anything like that?
So I think the biggest step was actually from the master's to the PhD.
Mm.
Because bachelor's and master's, this is like some kind of strictly organized. You have lectures that you need to pass, and you have some lectures you can choose, and in the end you need to have enough points to have your degree. But for the PhD everything was different, because then it was okay, now it's not just Professor Presser as one of my advisors. There's also Professor Auerbach, and he's in
Yeah.
Tel Aviv, and he's like one of these big guys, and he was with all this knowledge and everything. That was like, okay, I need to step out now and really do much more. And as I said already, Professor Presser was all the time very challenging. So like whenever you gave 100%, he requested 150%.
Yeah.
And like this bar moved upwards from like there was never this, okay, now it's done. It was all the time like, okay, and now we can do this and now we can do that and just try here and try there. And so this is, I guess, this was the biggest challenge for me to see what are my boundaries, like how much work can I actually provide to keep it in a healthy way,
Yeah.
and what is too much. Because there were times when it was like, okay, there was Saturday going to the university for measurements that was clear, and sometimes there was even Sunday. Uh, it was something to do, so there was like no break in between, and all these things I needed to learn that it can be too much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really good. And um I can see how, for the masters was very much, routine school, just like you would for the bachelor's. And then suddenly you're in a position where, you're not asked to take classes and take tests, right? You're asked to do whatever your professor wants or your other professor wants or whatever somebody else wants, and there's a lot of people kind of expecting things from you, right?
Yeah, and there's in the beginning of the thesis, it was this, okay, now I have several people and they have things in the head, like very abstract ideas or things that they saw in the past measurements that might be interesting. And the first challenge is to nail this abstract idea down into a measurement plan or into something more like real life and like testable. What types of measurements do you need? What preparations do you need for this? What materials do you need to synthesize or stuff? And all this is on you because
Yeah,
the professor has the idea and you are working on it. And
on the
this was
execution.
this exactly, the execution is on you, and this is the biggest challenge in the beginning to get this through.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's very good. And it's part of what we learn in the PhD process is how to do that, is how to take an abstract idea and turn it into steps and research and um, results, right?
Results, yeah, measurements and results, yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Um,
if you come up with something like we had with this Maxine measurements, when it's
yeah,
absolutely non-intuitive and people are questioning if you are doing the measurement right,
yeah,
those are challenging times.
yeah, for sure. You start to doubt yourself and everything, and
Yes,
it's
yes.
quite an experience. So along the same lines, what advice would you give to yourself? You already maybe said some of this, but what advice would you give to yourself starting your PhD?
Yeah, the advice would be like really do a lot of work. Like don't take a PhD as a 40-hour regular job. It's more than that. So that's you should know this, but take breaks and
Mhm.
like go to family, do stuff that is not related to your work to get your mind clear and stuff. So this I think is the biggest challenge to not overload yourself with too much work.
Yeah, yeah, very good advice. And then my last question is, do you have a fun memory or story to share about your PhD time? It does not have to include me, but if it does, that's fun. Um, but did you go on a cool conference trip, or did your research group do, fun group activities? Any stories?
Oh well, during that time there were some very, very nice conferences. So I remember one conference in Montpellier in France.
Ah,
Uh, that was the ISE and that like the French type of doing these conferences is a lot of very good food,
yeah.
a lot of very good wine, also to be honest.
Well, at
And
that conference in the middle of the day, they'd have like the
y-
morning session and then a long lunch where they would serve us really good food and wine, right?
exactly, that was
Yeah.
that was the conference in Montpellier, and I remember there was also Anne from Estonia was also there. and some guys from Poland, and like from like even from Tel Aviv. There was also the professors were there, and like to see all those guys who are sometimes can be a bit franky or a bit reserved, to
Yes.
see that, okay, give them a little bit of wine and have an extended lunch with delicious food. And the ideas that came out of these conferences, it took me the rest of the PhD to get them done. So
Yeah.
that was, it helped actually, like this kind of vibe with good food, having some wine and having these long discussions in this beautiful Montpellier town. That was good.
Yeah.
So that was one of the very good conferences. And yeah, what else? I mean, the time in South Africa was also very nice. I had a colleague called Carlejo. He was visiting the Saarland University in a year before. I went there, and yeah, we had a lot of fun times. I had a very nice group over there, and I had so many possibilities to do measurements in this lab. And in the meantime, like being in South Africa in this very beautiful country, we did so many road trips, and that was also a super fun time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to look back on those nice times, and the things that people you met across the world. Um, there's nothing quite like it now.
Yeah, yeah. I could not imagine now to have like this community, and you say, okay, now I go to a conference in Buenos Aires in Argentina,
Yeah.
and you will see there 10, 20 familiar faces. And even if they are not familiar, like after the first 2 days of conference, when you had the first discussions, you get familiar with them, and then you go for a beer, and like this kind of networking and enjoying this ability to travel so much, to see so fantastic places you would have never come before, and maybe not go there soon again.
Yeah.
That was very, very unique. And
Yeah.
it's, as you say, like you always smile when you think back on this, and it's like something that, beside all this hard work, was a great pleasure.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed. Um, well, Nico, that's all of my questions. Is there anything else you wanted to share or advise or tell the world? The whole world doesn't listen to this, but some people do.
Oh, hmm. I would say, take it. So not everybody is ready for a PhD. So
Mhm.
you should really be careful thinking, what exactly do you want and where do you want to go before you decide for your PhD? Because you can make a career also in the industry without a PhD. Like
Okay.
if you're a very talented salesperson, you don't need a PhD to become a leader in the sales department of a bigger company.
Mhm.
So this is the thing. Like, but if you go for a PhD, do it with 100% and with all your heart.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Get out of it what you put into it, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, Nico, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Is
It was
this your
nice to talk
first?
to you again.
Yes, very nice. I'm sure we'll keep in touch moving forward, and I'd be interested to hear how you do in your pursuits of the orchestra and the musical theater, perhaps.
Yes, I will keep you posted.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks to Nico for coming on the show. If you or someone you know wants to be interviewed on Impact Factor, feel free to reach out via Instagram and follow us for updates at @ImpactFactorPod. Thank you all for listening and have a great week.